Welcome back to Mr. Biegalski's English class. Okay, so you guys have been reading the Rosie Project now. You should have read at least a couple of chapters by now. I'm going to go over some notes for the first 4 chapters today. Maybe you haven't noticed all the things I'm going to mention, so here are a few things you might want to take note of as you're reading a story. So let's take a look at chapter 1 here. And chapter 1 is basically just an introduction to the protagonist, Don. He's a professor of genetics at the university in Melbourne, Australia. And Melbourne is the second largest city in Australia, so that's probably a pretty big time university. So he has to be a very talented guy to hold that position. He's still in his 30s, he's in his late 30s, and he is friends with the head of genetics at the university, whose name is Gene. Now, Gene is a bit older. He's in his 50s, and he is a professor of psychology. Gene is married to Claudia, who is also a psychologist. She's not a psychologist at the university. She's got her own private practice. Now, Gene asks Dawn to deliver a lecture on Asperger's syndrome so that Gene can go and fool around with a woman who is visiting from Chile. She's a Chilean academic. One thing we find out about Gene is that his goal is to have sex with a woman from every country around the world. So he's ticking off Chile off his list here. This seems to be a very kind of immature and juvenile thing to do for a guy who's in his 50s and who heads a department at a university. But Don kind of takes it in stride. I guess he's used to Gene's behavior. We find out a few more things about Don. He is tall, fit, good-looking, intelligent. He makes good money. And yet, despite all of those things, he has had trouble finding a woman to have a relationship with. He even has trouble maintaining friends. And we get an example of that when we see what happens when he goes out on a date and has an argument over apricot ice cream with his date and totally turns her off. He kind of comes on strong, and he has this habit of trying to prove that he's right at all costs, and that'll turn a lot of people off. All right, now moving on to chapter 2. Don delivers the lecture on Asperger's syndrome. He is blissfully unaware that he has Asperger's syndrome. However, he does notice that he has a lot of things in common with the children who are at the lecture. And of course, they're there with their parents. And Don's lecture doesn't go very well. He gets the children all worked up and gets them saying things like, you know, the logical thing to do in a situation is to shoot a baby and stuff like that. And the kids get all excited, and the lecture goes off the rails, and the parents run out of there. The whole thing is a disaster, but Don is totally unaware of this. And this is an example of Don misconstruing things. He thinks the lecture went well because he finished on time, he can get back on schedule. He's got a very rigidly set schedule. But of course, the lecture didn't go well at all, and he probably alarmed a lot of the parents of the children watching the lecture. Now, Don does point out that people with Asperger's have talents in areas that other people don't have talents. And one of these areas is computers. So anything analytical and logical, people with Asperger's syndrome are very good at deciphering those things. What they're less good at is deciphering some of those subtle social cues that a lot of other people can pick up on. Julie, who organized the lecture, asks Don out. She seems to be interested in him, and that totally goes over his head. He's not picking up on that at all. He literally thinks that she wants to talk to him about Asperger's syndrome, where in reality, she just wants to ask him out and hang out with him. And he rejects her because he just doesn't see a reason to talk to her about Asperger's syndrome. So far, Don seems to be a pretty robotic figure. He doesn't seem to get a lot of kind of normal human emotions, but we do get a little bit more of a human story from him at the end of the chapter when he talks about Daphne. Daphne is the older woman who lived in his building and lost her husband. Well, he got dementia, and eventually she got dementia as well. But Don was very kind to her, took his time with her, and he was very generous to her as well. And he made her feel good, and that made her remark that someday he would make someone a wonderful husband, which surprises him a great deal because this is not the feeling he got from most people. So then Don gets an idea to form a questionnaire and start the wife project. Everything is a project with Don. Everything is very rigidly organized and strictly planned. And so a questionnaire to weed out potential candidates for being his wife seems to be a good idea to him. He doesn't really realize that relationships and human interaction cannot be quantified with a score on a questionnaire. So moving on to chapter 3, Don takes schedules very seriously. He's very rigid in his scheduling of things. He wants to talk to Jean. Jean has just finished his lecture, and Jean is talking to some people who could donate some money to the university. And of course, that involves some schmoozing, that involves some social interaction afterwards, maybe extending the meeting a little later than the lecture was scheduled. The dean is sort of depending on Jean to do this, but Don bursts in and says, "Sorry, my turn." Jean's finished his lecture, and he literally doesn't see that he might be costing the university a bunch of money. And he doesn't get the dean's sarcasm when the dean kind of makes a sarcastic remark there. "No, that's okay. We didn't need the money from the donors." Now we get to meet Jean here, and we can see he's got a one-track mind. He is constantly trying to pick up women. He hires a short-skirted cleaner that Don remarks on. His receptionist is a beautiful woman, and so Jean seems to always have his head in the gutter. We also meet Jean's wife Claudia, who has sort of become a mentor to Don. She wants to help him out, help him overcome some of his social issues. She asks him if the Asperger's lecture rang any bells for him, which obviously maybe they even set it up so that Don would deliver the lecture so that maybe he could recognize some of the Asperger's symptoms in himself. He doesn't recognize them in himself, but he definitely recognizes them in a colleague of his from the department. People oftentimes see things about other people that they don't recognize in themselves, and Don is sort of showing us that quality. Don is frustrated with the dean of the department because his primary worry is academic integrity, whereas she seems to be concerned with that, but also concerned with how much money is coming into the department and stuff like that. So Don has a very one-track mind. He doesn't realize that sometimes you have to sort of juggle different things, and sometimes you have to loosen up on the academic integrity and make sure that you get funding for the projects that you're wanting to accomplish, and funding basically in order to run the school, quite frankly. And the dean is worried about all of these different things, whereas Don's primary worry as a professor is, hey, I just got to teach this, and I got to make sure that my students know it. And that's his only worry. He doesn't really view things from the dean's perspective, which shows that he has some trouble empathizing with other people. All right, final chapter we're going to look at today, chapter 4. So Don comes up with this questionnaire to weed out potential wife candidates, and he is very, very picky. He seems to be obsessed with trivial qualities rather than things that really make a relationship successful. So he's obsessed with food preferences, how early someone arrives, and things like that. But really what he should be looking at are traits that make for a long-lasting relationship, like having chemistry with a person or the ability to have fun with someone. Don sort of ignores those traits. And so it seems when he comes up with this questionnaire that he is looking for someone who is exactly like himself. And honestly, as we get to know Don throughout this book, we can see that there aren't going to be too many people who are just like he is. And then at the end of the chapter, Don goes to a matchmaking session, and we find out that he doesn't like small talk. People like Don generally don't like small talk. They want to get right into talking about important things, and they're not good at subtlety. We also find out that Don doesn't like religion. He's very logical, and he considers religion irrational. Now, at this matchmaking session, all women are very quickly eliminated. If they don't meet even one of his criteria, he assumes that they're not going to make a good partner. Okay, guys, so that's the first 4 chapters of the Rosie Project. The questions for those chapters will be due tomorrow. That's April the 16th. And then the next 4 chapters are going to be due on Monday of next week. Okay, so chapters 4 through 8 will be due on Monday. On Friday, I will post a video breaking down those chapters. So stay tuned. And if there's anything else that needs to be communicated, I will post it up in Google Classroom. Okay, guys, take care. Thanks. Biegalski's English class.